Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi. Hi, good morning. Good morning. Morning. Morning.
So from the point of view of the evidence, this is slightly this is a bit of an exaggeration. Amber Heard's lawyers were, perfectly respectable, but they really didn't shine, and they looked rather lackluster against Johnny Depp's team. It'll be interesting to see to what extent that has a bearing on the outcome of the case. And this is the other thing about general civil litigation, is focusing on the evidence. A lot of my clients like to bash on about the events.
And he slammed her up against the side wall of the bedroom, held her up by her neck, held her there for a second, and said, "I can fucking kill you, and you're an embarrassment." Saying that he threw her on the games table like a ping pong table. You remember seeing the pictures of that broken table. You remember her saying that at some point he had a broken bottle up against her face, and he told her that he'd carve up her face. I remember just not wanting to move because I didn't know if it was broken. The closet. He said, "I'll fucking kill you if you ever speak to me like that in front of my kids again." He inserted his fingers inside of her and sexually assaulted her, then trashed the trailer. He held her up against the wall while she was trying to get his arms off her neck, and he was squeezing her neck against the railway car. And he slammed her up against the side wall of the bedroom by her neck, holds her there, that was the next one.
All you're doing there is you are listing events that the jury have already heard. They've already heard her give evidence, whether they believe her or not. She's certainly very histrionic, and she spent a lot of time looking at the jury, whereas witnesses usually look at the lawyer who's examining or cross-examining them. You're just recounting or regurgitating the events, such as you might find in the pleadings, yeah? The pleadings particularize the story, the events. They're not about the evidence. Quite frankly, whether it's a judge or a jury, they know that you're one-sided, they know that you're prejudiced towards your own case, and they know you're going to say stuff and exaggerate stuff, yeah, and elaborate stuff in order to strengthen your case. So we're already like, yawn. Yeah, okay, you're regurgitating the events that we've already very, very familiar with, thank you very much. What I want you to talk to me about, Mr. Lawyer, is Lee Drew, because he seemed to say that this stuff had been going on, that he'd heard absolutely screaming, he'd heard crashing, he'd seen her after one incident in which she was crying and she had a bruise on her face, and the way he talks about it was as a sort of like, with someone who'd been living next door to this relationship. He talks about Johnny Depp coming up to him on the night of the 21st of May when Johnny Depp was drunk and probably high on drugs, and actually screaming into his face about 2 feet away.
I remember he said, "Open this fucking door, get me in here." And he came in, caught eyes with me right away, and beeline for me, screaming, cursing, spitting in my face.
I ran past him because he ran into the unit, and it scared the shit out of me because he was wasted and screaming.
Hold on, and I do believe the right eye had a little more of a gash right there. It wasn't that strong, it wasn't that swollen, but it was definitely some blue and yellow discoloration there.
I saw him coming at her, and that's when the bodyguard stepped in, like coming towards her. And I was in front of the fridge, and he came in from there, and was like coming at her, and then the bodyguard came in and scooped him up.
None of that was drilled into in closing arguments by Amber Heard's lawyers. And I just do wonder whether or not she has been somewhat let down by her lawyers. They also majored on a lot of the texting.
You can look at his text to Miss Heard the next day, where he says, "Once again, I find myself in a place of shame and regret. Of course, I am sorry. I really don't know why or what happened. Well, no wonder. You heard the voice on the plane. Of course he doesn't know what happened. But I will never do it again. My illness somehow crept up and grabbed me. I must get better. I love you and feel so bad for letting you down.
And the big takeaway of this in respect of evidence is the best evidence is witnesses. Yeah, that's why you have to be prepared for trial when you're bringing a case or defending a case. You want to be able to get into the witness box because that's where the truth comes out. Because you can say all sorts of nonsense on paper. As we know, civil litigation is a paper game, as I'm often fond of saying. But ultimately, when it comes to the trial and evidence is given, which very rarely happens, then it is all about the veracity of the person that's in that witness box in front of you. So, big takeaway here. Remember that witness testimony is very critical in civil litigation if you are determined to go all the way to trial, and you should be if you believe in your case. I have a lot of people saying, what's the law on audio evidence, and I've got this evidence, and surely my case is a slam dunk because I've got it all on tape. I recorded the meeting, the conversations that we had. No, my friend. So interested to watch this trial because as you see the audio evidence unfold, you think she's recording these conversations, and it just makes you think, to what extent can I rely on the recordings as accurate evidence that violence occurred, and when were they made, and when I was recording them, was I playing a part? I'm an actress, yeah. And there's one very interesting audio recording in which that happened in Australia, in which apparently, according to her testimony, he went on some sort of a rampage and chased her around the house, dragging her about by the hair and putting her on a table tennis table and cutting his finger off with a vodka bottle, and real full-on stuff. He was talking about the fact he was hiding from her.
In Australia, when we had the big fight where I lost the tip of my finger, at least 5 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms I went to
avoid talking to me, to avoid
escape
working it out. That's
to escape the fight.
You don't escape the fight. You escape the solution.
No.
You escape the solution.
No.
You escape figuring it out. We cannot work it out if you run away to the bathroom every time.
I did knock on a bathroom door on the first night.
Not a bathroom door, 5 bathroom doors and 2 bedrooms.
Johnny
right?
is not an accurate historian of what happened during
Ms. Heard,
that
Ms.
period
Heard,
of time. I'll guarantee
Ms.
you
Heard,
that.
that's not my question. 5 bathroom doors, 2 bedrooms. That's what you knocked on. That's what actually happened in Australia, isn't it, Ms. Heard?
I was there.
So that's
I remember it. I knocked on 1 bathroom door. I came on the first night after he decided to take the bag of MDMA.
Ms.
And I
Heard,
went to check
Ms.
on
Heard,
him and see
I'm going to
if we
move to
could-
strike everything after I knocked on 1 bathroom door.
She can't do that. She's answering the question. Not quite, so I will sustain the objection. Just answer the question, okay, ma'am?
And you would pursue him
That is incorrect.
because he was avoiding talking to you, right?
He did that first night when
he was
I tried
avoiding-
to talk to him about the drugs.
And he was avoiding working it out.
No, he was avoiding agreeing to not fight about the drugs.
You weren't scared of him at all, were you?
I have a mixed relationship with Johnny, and one in which I'm scared, one in which I love him very much.
I'm not talking about your mixed relationship. That night in Australia, after you cut off his finger with a bottle, you weren't scared of him at all, were you?
This is a man who tried to kill me. Of course it's scary. He's also my husband.
Using audio recordings is not really a very good idea. It's not very convincing evidence because a judge or a jury will just simply question you, and your character will be under the spotlight for someone who records things covertly, or at times in this case overtly. Now the classic in this case has been the one bit of video evidence that there is. Well, video evidence of Johnny Depp being allegedly in a rage and very violent. And here again, it's weak evidence, and yet Amber Heard's lawyers make a lot of this, and they played the video clip in their closing speech.
Let's see the monster. Let's see the monster in the flesh.
Nothing happened this morning, you know that?
Were you in here?
No.
So then nothing happened to you this morning?
Yeah, you're right. I just woke up and you were so sweet and nice. We were not even fighting this morning. All I did was say sorry.
Did something happen to you this morning? I don't think so.
It's all very arresting when you first see it. You think, God, yes, he is quite an aggressive. He's not the sweet person that we're being told he is by all his friends. And yet, you think, when you reflect upon it, and, you know, Johnny Depp's lawyers majored on the fact that this video evidence shows a man who's very angry after a very bad day at the office. I think he got some very bad news that day. And here she is secretly recording him.
Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're crazy.
Have you drunk this whole thing this morning?
Oh, you got this going? You got this going?
I just started it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Really?
And she secretly took photos of him when he was drugged up, when he was catatonic in the corner of a bedroom, when he was slumped in a chair looking not at all like a celebrity, having just passed out, you know, having ice cream like a baby spread all over him like he can't, like a disabled person. You don't focus on the fact that he's a drug addict or a user or an alcoholic. You focus on the fact of what sort of woman, what sort of wife, who's apparently allegedly trying to get her husband to kick the stuff, the drugs and the alcohol, is taking secret photographs and then pinging them to friends saying, this is what I have to deal with.
What sort of person records something like that? What sort of person takes pictures of their husband or boyfriend or fiance who's struggling with sobriety, nodding off with ice cream dripping down his leg, his hand in his pocket, or asleep on the ground? What sort of person does that?
Also telegraphs, which is the elephant in the room, that there's no video evidence of any actual physical violence. Now you may say, well, why will she be videoing or recording violence? It's not something you press play when someone hits you and goes after you. But by virtue of the fact that her lawyers have made a mountain out of the video evidence, draws attention to the fact, even if it's a wrong assumption that the jury members are making, that there isn't any video evidence or audio evidence of the actual violence itself. What Johnny Depp's lawyers were very good at doing, particularly during the closing arguments, was majoring on the witnesses. And this lawyer, Camila Vasquez, who is obviously going to go on to a massive career after this, really nailed it. She basically ran through all the witnesses in her first part of her closing argument, and then in the rebuttal that she did after the other did theirs, and then they had the counterclaim arguments. She used the counterclaim argument, i.e. the argument that he'd defamed her, to nail home the points that she'd already made in the previous argument, because she understood that the critical issue with whether or not there'd been actual domestic abuse.
Also another former police officer, Ben King. He worked for the Queen of England. David Kipper, Dr. David Kipper. Miss Heard's doctor. And yes, Mr. Depp's doctor. Debbie Lloyd, a nurse. Aaron Filati, Miss Heard's personal nurse. Officer Sines, an LA police officer with training in domestic violence. Officer Haddon, her understudy, yes, in his first week, studying to pick up on these signs of domestic abuse. Officer Gatlin, Brandon Patterson, who worked at Eastern Columbia Building, Kate James, Ms. Heard's former personal assistant, Tara Roberts, Alejandro Romero. He took his deposition from his car because he had to go to work, but it didn't stop him from telling the truth. Edward White, Mr. Depp's business manager, Laura Wasser, one of the most famous divorce lawyers in California, Morgan Knight, Beverly Leonard, Morgan Tremaine, and Kate Moss, and all the other witnesses whose stories support Mr. Depp's description of what took place. These people have nothing to gain by coming forward.
Johnny Depp doesn't care if she wins her counterclaim argument. He wants to clear his name and get his life back and get the label of domestic abuser ripped off his back. And yet, Amber Heard's lawyer spent most of her closing argument, not all, but on the counterclaim, going on about how he'd and trying to convince the jury that he'd defamed her. And even if the jury find that he has, or his lawyer has defamed her, I doubt that they're going to award her much in the way of damages, because they won't think it's made a huge dent on her financial situation in terms of her career, unlike Johnny Depp. Once again, drawing attention to issues that really Amber Heard's lawyers shouldn't be drawing attention to. So this Camila Vasquez then used, very smart lawyering, her rebuttal to the counterclaim, not to go on about the arguments I've just illustrated, which is kind of self-evident, but to really nail the point about domestic violence and whether or not it occurred. And she listed the witnesses, she listed the police officers, she talked about the Ben King worked for the Queen, he worked in prison. She took away all the defence's explosive power in terms of alleging that Johnny Depp's staff were covering for him. Quite a good convincing argument. Maybe they were, but the impression that you're left with off the closing arguments were that there were plenty of his witnesses who just wanted to say the truth. She pointed out very cleverly that a lot of his witnesses came to court, whereas very few of Amber Heard's did. I think only her sister came to court to give evidence in the witness box itself. Yeah, and listing her professions, some of Johnny Depp's security guards have been, sheriffs at the Los Angeles Police Department or something like that. So she gave their credentials in her rebuttal to the counterclaim, the credentials of the witnesses, having raised them in the first part of her closing argument. She then really nailed it by describing their professions, something that Amber Heard's lawyers didn't do. They didn't major away at the caliber of their own witnesses, particularly Lee Drew. I urge you look at Lee Drew's evidence, day 18, 19 or 20 thereabouts of the trial, which was given by deposition. And I think Raquel's evidence is also very convincing, although she also gave evidence that Amber Heard hit her when she couldn't find a wine glass. But that there was probably some abuse going on, that there was probably some violence. And for goodness gracious sake, if she was a provocateur, and she certainly took the game to him and gave him as much as he gave her verbally, a lot more in fact, then you would expect that he would have lashed out and hit her. Rather, they tended to talk about text messages he'd sent. They looked quite convincing. But interestingly, they majored on the text evidence in which he expresses his profound apologies for letting the monster out. But they didn't actually refer, for example, there was one text message that she'd sent to her mother quite early on saying, "Johnny, I've had a bad day, Johnny's hit me again, everything's fine though, it was just, the text reads as very natural, as if it's not the histrionic Amber Heard having sent it, but just a young woman who's in a violent relationship. Didn't major on those sorts of subtleties, and as I say, they took too much time in their closing arguments. They're limited to how much time that they've got, these lawyers. They gave too much time to the background of him being alcoholic, drug user and a washed-up celebrity who was basically swinging his weight around. Just the final point on the evidence is, you had a very good point made by Johnny Depp's team, which is that in most instances of the Me Too allegations, this is the whole point of Me Too, is that a woman has come forward and said, yes, it wasn't just me, it wasn't just you, it was me. And so you've got the classic genuine abusers, perpetrators, other women coming out and lending their voice and obviously providing a lot of weight of evidence against him, which then leads to his prosecution, which is the whole point, isn't it? That it's very difficult for a woman alone in a domestic abuse situation. God knows she doesn't want to get anywhere near a courtroom to convince a jury that she's not making it all up.
Again, nobody has come out of the woodwork to say Me Too. This is the unique and singular Me Too case where there's not a single Me Too. In fact, to the contrary, Kate Moss, who was in a romantic relationship with Mr. Depp for 3 years, which he broke off, came forward to say, no, he never pushed her down any stairs.
Ultimately, it's those witnesses that are the most convincing. It's a guy saying, yeah, I walked in, she was in a mess. I remember it clearly because I'd been making tacos and I dropped them on the floor and I looked up at her and there I saw a black eye. That is far more convincing than a photo. You don't know whether it's been tampered with, you don't know precisely when it was taken, there's light conditions and so on. If there's voice recordings or video recordings, you're suspicious about the fact that somebody's been recording an incident. A good quality witness evidence is gold. And you're wondering, what views do I have? What sort of finding do I think the jury will make? It's Monday morning and the jury are out. They might be out all week. I wouldn't be surprised. We might not hear of what the jury have got to say about the whole matter until the end of the week. I come back to my original point about the UK and the US systems as regards defamation. I think that this is why it's so interesting. The UK system has changed so that now a judge decides, he makes the finding of fact what happened. Justice Nicol found repeatedly that Johnny Depp had seriously abused Amber Heard to the point of putting her in fear of her life. Would a jury, after a 6-week trial, a lot more evidence, as opposed to a 2-week one, or a 3-week one in the UK trial, will a jury make a different finding? And here's the interesting and mysterious and controversial thing about jury trials, isn't it? Because a jury, unlike in O.J. Simpson, where O.J. Simpson's lawyers managed to confuse the hell out of them in California and get them, and select the right jury perhaps, and get them to return a verdict of not guilty when it was patently obvious that he was. In this case, you've got the reverse situation in which a jury might be minded to, in its own mind, step aside. And I think, because I think it's difficult not to make a finding that Johnny Depp hit her. I mean, I think, some of the evidence is pretty convincing that she had suffered some physical violence. Who knows what goes on behind closed doors in terms of sex and violence and all the rest of it. But I'm talking about, there seems to be some incidents in which he just, he punched her, and perhaps repeatedly so, over a course of time. Now, it may have been sporadic, it may have been one or two, and he may have been absolutely pushed to the end of his tether to do it. I think, whereas a judge could not find in favour of Johnny Depp, because he'd have to, as a trained lawyer, make a finding of fact that he had punched her, and therefore that Johnny Depp loses his defamation claim, he's an abuser. even if she's hit him, he's hit her, he's the man, he's using his physical strength. A jury can go off piece, can't it? And you do wonder whether or not a jury, even if they do think that he hit her, will nevertheless find for him, because they think that she's massively exaggerated the situation, milked it, that the whole article was a bit of a publicity stunt for her, becoming a mouthpiece for the Me Too movement as a bit of a publicity stunt, even to the point at which you saw evidence given that, particularly in the closing speech by Camila Vasquez, that her laughing with friends a couple of days after she'd basically appeared at the family court looking absolutely bruised and battered, and then immediately had walked out into a sea of paparazzi, and there was some evidence, or at least some suggestion, that she'd basically tipped them off.
Their objective was to capture her leaving the courthouse, and then she was going to sort of stop and turn towards the camera to display the bruise on the right side of her face, the alleged bruise.
Did your team of videographers get the shot of Amber Heard?
We did.
Have you seen the kitchen cabinet video that was played in this trial?
I have, yes.
How does that video that was played in this trial compare to the one you received on August 12, 2016?
When I had clicked the direct link that we received and watched the video in its entirety, it was much shorter than the video we had received, than the video that's been played in this trial. There was a bit at the beginning that was played here in which Ms. Heard is seemingly sort of setting up the camera and getting into position. And then there's a bit at the end where she's seemingly sniggering and looks at the camera. That part was not present in what we received.
Did TMZ edit the video?
No, not even a little.
You know this case is being televised, right?
I am aware that there are cameras.
And so this gets you your 15 minutes of fame, doesn't
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
I can ask that question.
Overruled.
So I stand to gain nothing from this. I'm actually putting myself kind of in a target of TMZ, a very litigious organization, and I'm not seeking any 15 minutes here. Though you're welcome to speculate. I could say the same thing by taking Amber Heard as a client for you.
A little argumentative, don't you think?
Oh, hardly. I find that to be purely logical.
I just wonder whether or not, therefore, that the jury may find for Johnny Depp. I think they may also find for her. They'll accept that his lawyer is exaggerating when he said that it was all a big put-up, it was a big hoax, that they'd called the police and then they'd called a second set of police when the first set of police didn't give them what they wanted and they trashed the flat. No, that didn't happen. If you've looked at the evidence and the witnesses, that is clear. So they might find for her, and her counterclaim wins, and also they might find for Johnny Depp. And they might feel that there's a certain sort of poetic justice in that.
And then there was a divorce settlement, you got $7 million. People were saying this is all about the money, but then you did something that twisted that whole argument. What did you do with that money?
$7 million in total was donated to, I split it between the ACLU and Children's Hospital of Los Angeles.
ACLU is a human rights organization.
Sorry, ACLU is a prominent organization, nonprofit organization in the United States. Yeah. It's called the American Civil Liberties Union, and they work on behalf of marginalized communities on the ground and in legislative reform.
Right.
And
well, more power to you, because that's something that I've never heard of.
I wanted nothing.
As of today, you have not donated, paid $7 million of your divorce settlement to charity, right?
I have not been able to fulfill those obligations yet.
It's fascinating. Will his lawyers get it over the wire is the question that I have. And have they persuaded the jury that she is dishonest? And I think as a jury member, and I think you probably share my sentiments on this, if you're finding it difficult to find for someone in a trial, you're probably what might get you over the wire is that you think they're being dishonest. If someone's in court under oath and is lying, then you might be tempted to find against them purely for that reason, even though you think that he did throw at least a few punches along the way. And I wonder whether or not her thirst and her hunger for the limelight, and the fact that she was clearly deeply infatuated with this man, and found it impossible to let him leave. I wonder whether or not the jury may think that, yeah, her getting a restraining order happened because she saw that he was leaving. It was the day after his mother had died, and apparently he gave evidence that he decided that he was going to tell her it was over. So, well, watch this space. I might do a little follow-up vlog after this one, once we've got the verdict from the jury.